For those who seek adventure, this is the Buffalo Roamer Podcast, sharing the people, places, and moments that make a life on the loose worth living.
The thing that's going to stick out to you most is when they open up that plane door. The cold is something like you've never felt.
The jungle's so thick, even if you had a machete, you couldn't get through it.
There's a huge blonde grizzly bear. And when it saw us, this thing put its head down, stomped on the ground, and hissed like an alligator.
I just crossed this brutal stretch of desert, and I was really suffering.
I'm your host, Will Collins. I'm an adventurer, outdoorsman, and roamer of wild places. I've backpacked the Brooks Range, rafted the Grand Canyon, and have canoed from source to sea, both the Mississippi and Yukon rivers. I live for adventure, travel, fresh air, and diving into the unknown. And now, I hope to share my passion with you on the Buffalo Roamer Podcast. Oh yeah, rocking and rolling. Another episode of the Buffalo Roamer Podcast. Here we go. It's been far too long. Thanks for sticking around, still listening to the podcast. We got new episodes coming your way. A new schedule here for the show. First and third Friday of every month, we will come out with new Buffalo Roamer Podcast episodes. That is twice a month, the first and third Friday of every month. That schedule is going to be allow us to be a little more consistent with getting episodes out to you. Again, I know it's been a while, but we're excited to get this train fired up and rolling once again. So new episodes coming your way first and third Friday of every month. Also want to let you know that if you're looking for something to do next summer, I got the dream trip for you. Buffalo Roamer Wilderness Trips next summer, July 29th through August 5th. We are going to the Yukon River up in the Yukon Territory of Canada in Whitehorse, Canada, for an 8-day, 7-night backcountry canoeing adventure. It's going to be an epic trip. Already got a couple people signed up. Only a few slots left for that trip. Again, that's next summer, next July, up in the Yukon Territory in Canada. Backcountry canoeing trip, canoeing the most beautiful turquoise wilderness water you could ever want. So if that interests you, go check out buffaloroamer.com. We're going to have an awesome crew going up there for that guided trip. Going to be a blast. Okay, today's episode is going to be really fun. John Kraft is on the show today. John is currently walking the entire length of the Lewis and Clark Trail from St. Louis, Missouri, all the way to the ocean, to the Pacific Ocean. He's pulling a little buggy. We'll get into all the specifics of how he's doing that all, but he's currently in North Dakota. I was able to catch up with John. He is walking the trail to the ocean, and then he's canoeing all the way back. As if walking wasn't enough, he's going to also throw on top of that canoeing the longest river in America, which is the Missouri River. So quite the undertaking. It's going to take him multiple years. He's taking a break this winter after he wraps up here in about 20 days, and then he'll continue on the journey next summer. But quite the remarkable journey. Had a really good time speaking with him. Without further ado, here is John Kraft on the Buffalo Roamer Podcast. Awesome. I'm excited to talk to you. I don't know honestly, I'm not sure how I came across you, where I saw your trip. I don't know if it was Instagram or what, but it's an awesome adventure that you're on. Give me like just the nuts and bolts of this trip that you're currently on. We talked before we started here. You're somewhere in North Dakota.
Yeah, man. Thanks for having me on. Be a pleasure to talk to you. So yeah, essentially, I'm retracing the Lewis and Clark Trail from where the point they all got together in St. Louis, St. Charles, Missouri, following the Missouri River up over the mountains, and then down the Clearwater, Snake, and Columbia rivers to the ocean, and then turning around 180 degrees and heading back. So, yeah, it's essentially a foot-by-foot, foot-step-by-foot retracing the Lewis and Clark Trail, but I improvise a little bit. I can't. I'm walking right now. I'm walking up the Missouri River on the way back. I'll canoe, and so I'm not right on their trail on the way out. But it allows me to improvise a little bit and see the landscape, and that's a pretty cool aspect of it too.
That's awesome, man. That's a hell of an endeavor right there. Not only to walk the length of the longest river in America, but then to paddle it back, that's a tall task. So how long do you anticipate this trip to take, and where are you at in the stages of this journey now?
A long ways to go. That's about all I know. No, I started off with it. Kind of making an itinerary in my mind, and thinking, I got to be done in 2 summers. You know how that goes. But I quickly found out once I started that, trying to keep up with a schedule and trying to prioritize, seeing all that I wanted to see, meeting all the people I wanted to meet, and just simply at its foundation, just enjoying the experience I was going to be able to take advantage of the trip more by taking that schedule off, taking the deadline off, and just saying, I'll get done when I get done, and I'm gonna enjoy it. And so that's kind of what I've been doing so far. It's not a continuous trip. I tell people often ask me what I'm going to do throughout the winter, and like if I'm going to keep walking or if I'm just going to camp out somewhere, And I'm not tough enough to camp in North Dakota throughout the winter.
I don't blame you.
Yeah, so it's not one of those trips where you say, "Oh, I'm taking 6 months off and I'm going to do this journey, expedition, trek, whatever you want to call it," and then I'm back to reality. This is more of a, this is the life I want to live, and there's no reason to put a deadline on it. I'm, building something that I can extend as long as I can, and so yeah, that's kind of the gist of the scheduling of it all.
Awesome, man. And so you started, what day are you on now? Or I guess, are you even counting days of this trip?
Yeah, I count trail days. I'd have to go back and look at my journal and see which exact day I'm on now. But I started March 19th of 2021. But I took a couple months off in the middle of the summer. I'm a whitewater guide out in California on the Kern River. And so I took a couple months off and went out there and had some fun on the river with friends and got out of the hot weather and enjoyed the water a little bit. And that water experience will help me out later on too, as I'm canoeing. And so I'm going to go for another 3 weeks or so till first week in November. I got family coming to pick me up where I'm at, and on the way home we're going to go do some pheasant hunting in South Dakota. But yeah, I don't really have a fine count on how many days I've been out here, other than just in the journal. I don't keep it, on my head all the time. But if I had to guess, I think it's around mid 90s, I think.
Awesome. It's a long way to go. That's for sure, to walk from basically St. Louis all the way to wherever you are in North Dakota. That's a long journey, and it sounds like you got the right idea too, stopping in South Dakota to find yourself some pheasants on the way back.
Yeah. It's kind of this weird deal. My family and I always go pheasant hunting. I've got bird dogs myself, and that's probably what I do more than anything hunting wise is upland hunting. We've never hunted in South Dakota, and just happened that the year I'm doing this is the year that we all decided we're going to South Dakota to go pheasant hunting. So
nice. I bet you've seen a lot of them walking the roads of South Dakota and North Dakota.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of pheasants. I've probably seen more sharp tails than pheasants.
Interesting.
And greater prairie chickens. It seems like the drought has been pretty hard on the pheasants, and those sharp tails and prairie chickens are a little bit hardier towards that sort of thing. But yeah, I'm looking forward to getting some ditch parrots up in front of the gun barrel.
That's right,
for sure.
That sounds like a blast. Okay, so I'm trying to get my head around the scope of what we got going here on day 90 or so of this journey, to trace the Lewis and Clark Trail and then canoe it essentially back. And yeah, from some of the photos I've seen, you have basically, it looks like some sort of home fabricated cart that you're pulling behind you as you're walking. Give me like just kind of just a nuts and bolts, so we can get an idea of like how this trip is going. You got a cart, you're pulling it. What types of roads are you walking? Like, give me a lowdown on the cart. Give me that stuff.
Yeah. So, as most of these trips go, you spend a lot of time conceptualizing logistics, gear, scheduling, things like that. And I guess if I'm honest, I started thinking about this trip probably more than 5 years ago. when I first started reading Lewis and Clark journals. I'd always been interested in the trip, but never really dived in deep until 5 or 6 years ago. And I was looking for, a long hike like this, a long journey, and Lewis and Clark sounded awesome at the time. And so, at that point, I kind of looking at the route and, well, is there even a, hiking trail that follows this, historic expedition? And the answer is no. And so, yeah, a lot of it's on roads, a lot of county dirt roads, and also county and state highways. I stay off the interstate, that sort of thing. And I'm pulling all my gear and what essentially is a rickshaw, kind of inspired from like the Indian street rickshaws, that essentially lets me have a lot of luxuries. I've got a bunch of camera gear. I've got, great camping gear. My background is more in like ultralight backpacking, and I could have gone that route, but it's a lot harder on your knees, especially walking on pavement. This allows me to carry more gear, allows me to carry water for 2 weeks at a time, food for 2 weeks at a time, and gives me a lot more flexibility in what I can do. And it's also easier on my body too, I think. And so, yeah, the rickshaw, it just kind of started off as a drawing on a notebook paper, and it just kind of built from there.
That's awesome.
Even when my uncle and I started building it, I didn't really have a final plan. I knew about the capacity that I wanted it, just based on gearboxes and whatnot that I had.
And
I got to
actually,
fit this stuff in there.
Real quick, John, while we're talking about this, where can people go like look at a picture of this if they're on their phone listening to this or whatever?
Right, you can check out my Instagram. It's the handle is Flatlanders Pursuit, and you can go to my Facebook page. It's just John Kraft, Kraft, Kraft like the cheese. Anyway, there's I think a few different pictures on there from post earlier this spring. Yeah, essentially it's just aluminum. It's an aluminum cart. It's about 50 inches by 30 by 20. Got two big tricycle wheels on it that my uncle and I retrofitted onto there with some bicycle brakes and a long handle out front with wooden handles that I can pull on. It weighs about 80 pounds maybe, and then I can put about 250 pounds of gear. It's pretty light. It rolls really easy. Like I said, it's got brakes, even though I've ran into some problems with those. But overall, it's really performed pretty well for me. It's pretty durable. And like I said, it's been all that I need so far. So
that's awesome, man. Yeah, it looks really slick too. Just in the photos of it, it's a clean looking thing. And in my head there, John, as I was as you were mentioning that, the first thing that pops into my head, this is going to be a kind of a two-part thing. The first thing that pops into my head is, well, if you basically have that, why not just have a bike, right? Like, what's the big difference between that and a bike? And then it brings me back. I don't know. Probably not familiar, maybe you are, with a fella named Bill Mason. He's an old canoeist, Canadian canoeist, one of the most famous paddlers and kind of conservationist and advocate of the sport of canoeing. I love to canoe. And I remember watching one of his old videos one time and him explaining the difference of exploring the North Country of Canada in a canoe versus a motorboat. And like the way that he described, you get to know like that area so much more intimately in a canoe versus a motorboat, and you get to like experience that area and explore more intimately and detailed than you would just flying by. And I don't know if that has played a part into your journey versus like a bicycle, but I imagine it has to, going at a snail's pace walking the road.
Yeah, man, you hit it right on the head. That concept transfers right onto the land. The world is this tiny place. We can all be connected over email, social media. I can be in Australia on a jet plane in, less than 24 hours, but it's taken me, 90 days of walking to get from Missouri to North Dakota. On a bike, yeah, you're still moving pretty slow, but heck, there's those ultra races that you can go the length of the Continental Divide in 15, 16, 17 days, and so when I'm on foot, you're exactly right. I feel a lot more intimate with the areas that I'm walking through. It forces me to slow down, to look at things. I'm a pretty analytical mind, pretty observational mind. My background is in biology, conservation biology, and so I love walking through different landscapes and learning as I go. And so, if you're only going 15 to 20 miles a day, you're pretty much forced to just kind of sink into your surroundings. You can do the same thing on a bicycle, but I've never really been a cyclist, and I love walking, and so that's the route I went. Yeah.
What if you had to think of, a couple of moments or an overarching theme of the 90 days since you've been hauling your rickshaw from St. Louis to North Dakota so far? Is there any like one area or one moment that sticks out, like, man, that was awesome, or even just like an overarching theme of the trip?
Yeah, I think it's always evolving. I think one of the reasons I like traveling so much is that, you're constantly building these new versions of yourself and everywhere you are, because you're meeting different people, having different experiences, and all those sort of Lego blocks build up to, your perspective of the world, and how you see yourself and how the world sees you. And so the journey is kind of going in a similar direction. The first few weeks, it was surreal how many different people that I met, that were either offering, trail magic, or just interesting conversations. Here more lately, it's been more about the landscapes, and I feel like I'm in a bit of a different time and place in some of these areas that haven't been quite as influenced by European settlement as places closer to civilization. And so it really just depends on the areas that I'm walking through. But I would say the highlights, probably the biggest highlight, is definitely the people that I've met, the community that's been, building around me. Not only community from home, friends, family that I'm interacting with before the trip, but, I'm building a network of people that I've met, people that even that I haven't met, of just, see what I'm doing online. And we're all connected because of this, thing that I'm doing. And so whether it's words of encouragement that I get over Facebook messages or an Instagram message or something like that, or it's just, simply somebody sharing that, hey, your trip has inspired me to get outside a little bit more. That's a success in my mind. Of it gives me energy to keep walking. And so that's probably the overarching theme, I guess. If I had to condense everything in this summer down to one thing, it's been the blessings that the community I've built, that has been built around me, the blessings that has offered. So
It's been awesome, man. It seems like every time I do this podcast, it all comes back to this, and it's a common refrain, but it's like, it's so funny how, and I'm sure you sound like a well-traveled man. It sounds like, it's funny how before you leave, you anticipate all of the challenges. How big do I need to make the rickshaw? How far am I going to have to go this day? Am I going to be able to have water when I'm in the middle of nowhere, South Dakota, from this stretch to that stretch? And you're thinking of like all of the beautiful sunflower fields you're going to see and all this. But at the end of the day, it always comes back to the people along the way, the interactions you make with the people that you've met. And it's awesome to be able to travel the country at a snail's pace, walking the road, meeting those people. It's really cool.
Yeah, it's a common, like you said, it's a common refrain you hear from, through hikers, through, folks that canoe the entire Missouri or Mississippi, or, or wherever. People that take these long journeys, I think, that are maybe starting themselves a little bit on, social interaction, and the social interaction they do get tends to be positive, and those things start to build up and build this, ideologic or glamorous image in your head about, the footsteps you've taken or the path you've traveled. And so, yeah, I think that's one of the greatest things about, maybe the greatest thing about doing things like this, taking trips like this. So
what if you had to pick out one character in particular along your way, what would you say? What would you say is one person, if you could just like paint a quick portrait of this person, the most interesting or off the wall or memorable character that you've come across so far?
Yeah, there's I don't know if I could say one is any leveled up above the others. There's one guy that comes to mind in Missouri. All I got was a nickname for him, and I always remember his dog's name. His dog's name was What's Left. He had just lost a dog, and he went over. I think he had sold an ad in the newspaper or something for puppies, and he went over to this house to try and get one, and there was only one left, and so that's what ended up being the dog's name, was What's Left, the only one left. Anyway, he was an older gentleman, lived by the river in Missouri, and spent his whole life there. Just a kind of an enigmatic guy, and just had a lot of stories, and depending on where you come from in the country, you always have these regional sayings and quips that everybody likes to, throw out at you. And he just had all kinds of different little things like this. And he ended up leaving. I had got to my campsite, and we had a little conversation, and he just kind of left abruptly. Like we're having a conversation, just in the middle of it, he just leaves, right? Without really saying anything. I said, okay, that's the end of that. And 20 or 30 minutes later, here he comes with a sack of McDonald's, and he had went and just bought me dinner.
Nice.
And so we sat there, and we talked for another hour, maybe 2 hours even, as the sun went down, and ate chicken nuggets and drank a milkshake. And I don't even know if he ate any of his food. I think What's Left got all of it. But
that's good.
But anyway, yeah, he was a lot of fun. But there's all sorts of characters like that that stick out in my mind, and most of the time it's because of the generosity they offer, and the energy, I guess, that they pass on when they extend those niceties, when they extend that hospitality to a stranger. It sounds kind of out there, and I don't know how to describe it, but I mean, there is this transfer of, whether it's just being around somebody that has a positive attitude, or being around somebody that wants to help, a stranger out, something about that connection just fuels you a little bit. And I'm sure you've experienced that too.
100%. And for me, at least, it's one of those things where you get a pretty good idea within the first instant of running into somebody, of which way it's going to go. If they're going to, very, very rarely does it go the wrong way, but you can usually tell pretty quick.
Right.
But who knows? Sometimes, someday we'll both probably get burned, but I would think that all the good stuff will add up to it. How about?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, how's it been walking along the Missouri River, or generally along the Missouri, through some of those Nebraska, South Dakota, North Dakota rural parts? Because I spent 3 years in Watertown, South Dakota, on the east side of South Dakota, and I've driven across that state many times, hunted and fished all across much of that state. And dude, you want to talk about some rural stuff, man. South Dakota's got it, and North Dakota's got it in spades as well. How has that experience been, traveling through that by foot?
Yeah, it's been great. I'd be lying if I didn't. One of the motivations for doing this wasn't, an isolation, wasn't a unplugging, for so to speak, from not only electronics, but society a little bit too. I used to be kind of scared of spending time alone, but over time I've learned that it's pretty good for me, and it's healthy for me. And so the more rural it gets, the better it is in my mind for a period of time. Don't get me wrong, I love striding into town and rolling up to the restaurant and eating a double cheeseburger after I've spent, a week out in the middle of nowhere. But even you go to a state park and camp, you got night lights, you got other sounds, you got distractions that are taking you away from the moment. And, I've camped in a lot of ditches and on this trip, a lot of road right-of-ways because there's literally nothing else available. And those are the nights that I'm at the most peaceful. 6 o'clock in the morning, there may be somebody drive by heading to work, but there's no lights other than stars and other than the moonlight, and there's no distractions, and you really feel alone out there. And that's a appealing part of doing things like this for sure.
Absolutely, man.
So
as you say that, I'm just imagining the stars and the Milky Way popping out, with just acres, hundreds of thousands of acres of sunflower or soybean or corn or whatever it is, and only the stars above me. It doesn't sound too bad right now.
Yeah, I get a little tired of walking by cornfield after cornfield after cornfield. So I definitely enjoy. I'm a prairie guy. I'm from Kansas, and there's something about an unbroken, contiguous prairie that really gets me in the right frame of mind and puts me in a good space. And so, especially kind of walking that transition between the Missouri River breaks, where those drainages start to peep out a little bit more the closer you get to the river, and then up on top where most of the row crop agriculture is, hitting those prairie unbroken, untilled, virgin prairie landscapes is really what I love the most, for sure. But,
yeah, man, and I agree, man. And North Dakota has got a lot of that, so you got you got plenty ahead of you.
Yeah.
What has been some of your challenging days, or what has been your most physically or maybe mentally challenging day of the trip so far?
Really, I've been extremely lucky and blessed. I thought that just simply walking roads was going to be the most mentally challenging, which it probably has, but it hasn't been nearly as challenging as I thought it'd be. I'd much rather be walking through the Bob Marshall Wilderness in Montana or somewhere else 100 miles from a road. But and so I thought, walking highways and county roads was just going to be a real mental struggle, and was maybe because I knew that, maybe I'm a little bit more prepared for it. But it's really been pretty enjoyable so far, and I really haven't had to fight that obstacle too much. I guess probably the most challenging thing so far has been the heat in August and September, late August, early September. It's 100 degrees out, 80% humidity. I'm getting up at 4:30 a.m. to start walking before it gets light, and then I'm done by 10 a.m. and then I'm sitting around for 6 or 8 hours in the shade until I can walk a few more miles in the evening. And there was a point there where I felt like I was just drenched in sweat for about 2 weeks straight, where it's just like, you're chugging water all day long. So you're always worried about having enough water. You can't sleep at night because everything's sticky, and you can't sleep out in the open air because of all the mosquitoes and bugs and whatnot. So I'm really thankful for a nice tent and to keep the bugs off. But between the combination of no sleep and the heat and sweat, and that was probably the roughest physical portion of it so far. And really, mentally, like I said, I thought it was going to be the roads, but there really hasn't been a tremendous mental struggle yet. The first couple weeks, and I think this is pretty common with trips like this, is you're in this transition period between this more conventional way of life, working 9 to 5 in an office or whatever you may be doing, interacting with people every day, sleeping in your bed at night, worrying about normal day-to-day things, whether that's bills or family or relationships or whatever it may be. And I think a lot of times, trips like this will cause the individual to stress out about those things. The first couple of weeks, you're still thinking about, oh, did I pay that bill, or am I going to have enough money to pay that bill, or do I need, get work done on my car, or do I need to go spend time with a neighbor because he's going through a rough time, or how can I help somebody else out, things like that. And so there's this transition for me, at least over this, like that first 14, 15 to 20 days where you're just kind of panicking about finances. Do I really have enough money to do this? Family relationships. Can I afford to spend time away from mom and dad, or brothers and sisters and nieces and nephews? What kind of significant family moments am I missing? What kind of relationships am I causing or making sacrifices for? So you're kind of stressed out about those things, even to the point where I'll have nightmares for the first couple of weeks of a trip like this that, just kind of make me second guess what I'm doing. But at about 20 days, all that stuff starts to melt away. You push through it. And now the only things you're worried about are, where am I going to camp? Where am I going to get water? Where am I going to get food? And the simplicities in life, the foundations of life really start to rise to the top, instead of all those extra minutia. And so I think, that's a mental battle that I used to struggle with, a lot, but it wasn't near as bad on this trip. So that was a blessing.
That is a blessing. What was the run up to this trip like for you? How long had you been planning this, and how are you financing, funding, making a go of it here?
Yeah. So, okay. So I started this trip this last spring in March. I was actually going to hike the Continental Divide Trail last summer 2020. But COVID kind of put it into that. And that's when I first went out to California to do the whitewater rafting. Before that, I worked for a couple years for a company called, or an agriculture company. And I was on their R&D team in Kansas. And, I didn't really have a solid plan for what I was going to be doing. When I first took that job, I was thinking that, I'll probably stay with us for, a while. And just save money and see where it goes. Circumstances led to me leaving that job and just kind of looking for something else. But, I'm a single guy. I don't have a mortgage. I don't have a lot of bills. And so I was able to save quite a bit while I was working there. And, I had funds to just kind of live, just kind of float around for a bit. And so when I left that job, I was like, okay, I'm going to go hike the Continental Divide. COVID hit. That didn't work out. I went out to California to work. Last winter, probably early summer of 2020, I decided that I'm going to go for the Lewis and Clark thing. And so, all of winter 2020 and spring 2021 was kind of planning and preparing for this trip. And that was at home. I'm from Kansas originally, East Central Kansas, and southwest of Kansas City, a couple hours. And so all that time was spent at home preparing, building the rickshaw, ironing out logistics, making those sort of plans and budgeting, that all the sort of things that go into a trip like this.
Awesome, man. Yeah, that's awesome. It's cool to hear that. That you're out doing it and making it happen and going for it. What do you have ahead of you that you're looking forward to, or that you're maybe not questioning, but maybe apprehensive about? Is there anything that you're like, oh man, I don't know how this part's going to go?
I'm really excited to get in a boat, man.
Yeah, you've walked a long way.
Yeah. So I've got maybe another 1,000 miles to go through the rest of North Dakota and Montana, and then over the mountains, which I'll follow the old Nez Perce Trail over the mountains. And then once I hit the Clear Fork, then I'll get in a canoe and I'll canoe the Clear Fork, Snake, and Columbia to the ocean. And then, on the way back, like we talked about, I'll be canoeing the Missouri. I'm most looking forward to getting in a canoe. I've never really spent much time in the Pacific Northwest. And all you hear about it is how grand it is, and so I'm really looking forward to spending some time in Washington and Oregon. As far as apprehensions go, I've got quite a bit of canoe experience. Nothing like canoeing 2,400 miles along the Missouri, especially with big unpredictable lakes. So I think safety on the big reservoirs is probably what I'm most apprehensive about. And I've been following some folks online that have been that are canoeing the Missouri in its whole this year, and there's been quite a few that have quit because either they capsize the boat and lose a bunch of gear, or something like that. And so that weighs on my mind a little bit. But ultimately, when I get to that point, I'm gonna take it slow and try to prepare for whatever obstacles there may be. And like I said, I'm pretty comfortable in a canoe, but canoe in the Missouri River will only make me more comfortable.
Absolutely.
And so,
and hell, hey, to me that sounds a hell of a lot better than walking 2,400 miles. Put me in the boat.
yeah, right. Hey, walking's got its perks too.
Hey, no doubt. And I bet one of the perks, especially once you do start heading back towards St. Louis and heading downriver, although a lot of those lakes, as you mentioned, don't have any current, but I bet it's cool to be able to get the perspective that you have. I'm sure you've been able to see some cool vistas of the Missouri River as you've been walking along it. I'm sure that probably doesn't help the apprehension of seeing that big body of water.
Right. Yeah, it is. My uncle and I actually went fishing on Lake Francis Case in South Dakota. He came up and decided, I need to go fishing with nephew John for a couple days. And so he came up and met me, and we took an outfit around Lake Francis Case to go walleye fishing. And it's a bluebird morning. We've got a few poles in the water. We're catching walleye, and these clouds start to build on the horizon. And just kind of gradually things started to get a little rougher. And then, like the snap of your finger, it turned into a rodeo out there. And even in a 20-foot lund, it was a rocking and a rolling. And so me putting myself in future and thinking about, oh man, how I have a 350 horse motor to get me to say, I'm thinking, okay, I'm gonna have to put some more thinking and maybe some more cautionary thought into my plant. Excuse variance for sure.
That's funny. Hey, you're lagging a little bit, but I think we're good. Yeah, that's a good story. And
okay.
Yeah, the wind out there is intense, man. There's no joke about that. And like you said, it can come in the snap of a finger. You mentioned
right.
you mentioned that obviously you're going along the Lewis and Clark trail. Can you give me just like a brief layman's term rundown of the Lewis and Clark Trail? Obviously, I guess you kind of have as you've been describing your route, but also on a secondary part of that is, have you been able to hit any of the Lewis and Clark stops along your way and kind of tie in any of that history on your route so far?
Yeah, I do a lot of that. As far as the route goes, Lewis and Clark, as far as the whole party is concerned, started in St. Charles, Missouri, and in 1804, and took a couple of keel boats or a keel boat and a couple pirogues up the river, and they're pushing their way up the river with poles, and horses are pulling them along the bank and fighting the current the whole way. And that's one of the reasons why I'm walking, because I don't want to fight that river current all the way up. But anyway, they pushed themselves up the Missouri River at what it was in 1804. The first winter they got to to Fort Mandan in North Dakota, which is near Washburn, North Dakota. That was the kind of major trading point, rendezvous for the Great Plains indigenous tribes. The Mandan, Arikara, and Hidatsa tribes were all had villages there. They stayed there the winter of 1804, 1805. In 1805, they continued their way up the Missouri, over the mountains. They portaged over the Continental Divide and through the Bitterroots, and then down to the Clear Fork, and with their dugout canoes, they floated the Clear Fork Snake and Columbia to the ocean. Spent the winter of 1806 there in Astoria, Oregon, and then on the next summer they made their way back, following the same route. They did split up a bit on the way back. Clark explored the Yellowstone River. Meriwether Lewis took a group and explored the Marias River in Montana. But and I don't know how quite I'll approach those little diversions yet. I think I'm going to try and float the entire Yellowstone to its confluence with the Missouri, in addition to the Missouri itself. But that just all kind of depends on funding and timing, that sort of thing. But yeah, so I'm essentially following that route. As far as tying in, their history to my trip, I do it a lot. I read their journals just about every other day. And, I've got all those digitally. And so I'm not carrying 10 books around with just journal entries. But so I'm reading their journals. And, as a naturalist, which is my background, I love reading their journals and seeing how they saw the landscape, and then observing how it's changed since then. So, a lot of the significant points along the river, I'll stop and make observations. Just this last week, I was going through Washburn, North Dakota, and I was able to see the reproduction of their fort, their winter fort of 1804 to 1805, and there's an interpretive center there. There's also the Cross Ranch State Park. I stayed 2 nights there, and just kind of explored the river bottom, which is probably one of the more preserved sections of the Missouri River. As there's several large reservoirs and dams along the Missouri River that have really taken away its dynamic nature. But anyway, there by Washburn, it's still largely a braided, moving river with cottonwood woodlands or floodplains, ribboning the river. And so it was fun just to kind of connect that largely preserved landscape to their journals, and then with my eyes. And so yeah, there's a lot of cases like that where I try to connect the journals to what I'm doing in the present. And so that's an added aspect that's really enjoyable for sure.
Yeah,
so.
that's awesome, man. That's really cool. And I have to imagine when you're describing that, thinking about the Missouri River breaks out in Montana. I've done a canoeing trip out there. I'd have to think that's pretty similar, man. I feel like when you're out there, like if you were to be dropped there in 1804 or 1806 or whatever it is, I feel like it would look damn near the same. Maybe there might be some buffalo and some other stuff, but it's kind of cool to think about.
Yeah, I think if you asked any historian, and you asked them for the portion of the Missouri River that's the most unchanged the past 200 years, they would tell you the Missouri River breaks for sure.
Yeah, makes sense. Has there
definitely
been...
as far as it's definitely. Go ahead.
No, that's okay. Sorry. Has there been any or like what is there a interesting tidbit from the Lewis and Clark journals that you found either odd or just memorable or kind of out of character, or just an interesting tidbit from their journals and areas that you've been, or even just from their journals?
Yeah. One of my favorite passages is a William Clark entry from a July 4th, 1804. And they were near Atchison, Kansas at that point. There's a creek where they camped at called Independence Creek. And the entry in his journal that day describing the prairie landscape around him is one of my favorite passages. You can find that passage online. I'd highly recommend you, if you want a sense of the aesthetic beauty or I've never read another passage that better describes what I think of when I think of, boundless, unadulterated prairie as I do when I read that passage. It's a really, and Clark wasn't usually a very artistic or, romantic writer, I guess I'd say. He was very to the point, details, observations, very kind of a naturalist log type journal, where Meriwether Lewis was more of the artsy fartsy type, but and so that was just it's kind of a deviation from his normal, and it was just obvious that the landscape was really speaking to him at that point. The other thing that's really interesting is, these Meriwether Lewis was one of the foremost naturalists in his day. Although he hadn't had that much training prior to the trip, he was a very skilled naturalist on it, just based on his journal entries and whatnot. But the guys couldn't spell. They had all these abilities and observing nature and describing plants and animals, but they can't decide how to spell mosquito or whatever else. They go back. They go back and forth on spelling. Yeah, me too. But they go back and forth on different spellings, they must have, I don't know, playing with different pronunciations, or maybe they just forgot. I don't know. So it's sometimes it's pretty interesting to read their journals and think of, man, what are they actually trying to say here?
Funny.
Based on their spellings, and then trying to connect it to our vernacular today.
I imagine that as naturalists on this trip, and from the little that I know about their journey, that was part of their mission as well, was to describe and detail the landscape and nature. I imagine that there's got to be stuff that they documented that at that point had never been seen before, or never been, probably most of it, right?
Yeah, there's a ton of plants and animals that they described that were they were the first, at least European descriptions, scientific descriptions. Obviously indigenous peoples had been not only aware of species, but using them in their culture for a long time before Lewis and Clark were there. I mean, even quite a bit of French and British fur trader presence was along Missouri, at least up to Fort Mandan before Lewis and Clark. And so, although a lot of these plants and animals have been seen before, they'd never been described in the scientific nature, I guess you'd say. And so, I don't remember the exact numbers of plants and animals that they're credited with, but things like, 13-line ground squirrel, American pronghorn, a species of beaver, all these sorts of birds and plants and fish. They were very accomplished naturalists for their day. And so that's pretty cool. Especially, as I'm walking along and I'm recording, what birds I see, or where, I haven't even seen a pronghorn yet. And they've been seeing them since they were in Kansas. The first bison they saw was along the Kansas River, where, the confluence with the Missouri at today's Kansas-Missouri border. And, obviously the only bison I've seen have been domesticated within, inside fences. And so, making those connections about not only the presence, but abundance of certain animals. And today, they're either lack of abundance or the increase in abundance, whether it's an invasive species like some sort of European species that we brought over, like a starling, or lots of plants like leafy spurge or Serratia lesbideza, things like that. Those are pretty large and significant ecological changes that are going on since the time of their expedition. So it's a lot of fun too, because I'm not making any revelatory biological discoveries along my trip.
Not yet.
Yeah, right. I had a buddy I was talking to the other day. He's like, you never know what artifact your cart's gonna roll over, but yeah, so I'm not making any sort of revelatory discoveries, but I am in my mind forming this kind of shifted baseline perception of what the world is today versus what it was when they traveled through.
Yeah.
You know, and we all, as people that like the outdoors, as people that enjoy and dream about unadulterated, you know, nature and the wild, it's kind of fun to try and find those last vestiges of history, those last pristine places that we can read about from hundreds of years ago and are still there today.
Yeah, absolutely, and especially to be able to know the exact spot and the exact location and the exact day and year that
Right.
that occurred. That's a pretty unique comparison to be able to make.
Right.
So that's cool.
Yeah. It's amazing. It's amazing the latitude longitude accuracy
really
that that we've been able to pull from their journals. They were taking readings every day, and they used a system called dead reckoning, to which folks who listen to your podcast are probably familiar with, but essentially guessing the distance that you travel based on a azimuth and then the distance, and so based on this dead reckoning method, once they got to the ocean and they calculated up all the miles that they had traveled in a spot that they were pinpointed a spot where they were at. This is the point where the Columbia River drains into the Pacific Ocean. They were only 40 miles off.
That's insane.
With using nothing other than a sextant, artificial horizons, and they didn't have a GPS or a phone, obviously, things like that. And they were, 40 miles off with the distance that they had actually traveled, which is all based on, their estimations based on eyesight. And that's, I don't know, that's pretty, I have trouble guessing. Yeah. I have trouble guessing whether that deer is 20 yards or 25,
Right.
And so, able for them to be able to do that, that's pretty amazing.
Yeah. Pretty remarkable. That's wild. You mentioned earlier that you'd been doing a lot of camping in ditches along country roads and such. How does a typical camping and camp situation break down for you? And then also, is there one campsite that sticks out to you in your 90 however many days so far that was top tier?
Yeah. Yeah, so usually how it works is about the morning of, I kind of look at the map and I think, how far do I want to go today? And okay, I can go that far. Is there an accepted campsite that I can travel to? And a lot of times there are, especially when I'm traveling through, populated areas. I've camped in city parks and behind grain silos, things like that. But a lot of times I don't know where I'm going to end up. And so once it starts to get about, an hour from sunset, I start to think, okay, I got to find a campsite. And like I said, a lot of times that's in a road right of way. So about 30 minutes before dark, given that it's not too hot, sometimes when it was hot there, I'd be walking till 10, 11 at night, just because that was the only time that it was cool enough to do so. But on a normal day, I stop 30 minutes before dark and set up my tent, get everything pulled out of the rickshaw, cook some dinner, and settle in for the evening. And I go to sleep about 30 minutes, 45 minutes after dark, and wake up with the sunrise. And I have an alarm set at times, especially if I need to get up early to walk or something like that. But a lot of times I'm just getting up when the sun comes up and going to sleep when the sun goes down, and what happens between is just sort of flexible. and so yeah, that's kind of what I guess camp looks like.
Hey, that's a great way to be, man. That is a great way to be.
Yeah.
How about best campsite that you've had so far? Or is there anything that sticks out that was like, man, this spot was awesome?
Yeah, there's a few. Just for Pier on Lake Sharp. I can't remember the name of the Indian reservation there. I had just gotten off the Indian reservation, maybe 10 miles or so. and there's a wildlife management area, which, South Dakota doesn't technically allow you to camp in wildlife management areas, but hey, nobody's given me much trouble so far. But anyways, this wildlife management area looking over Lake Sharp, and nobody else there. It was a pretty the lake came up to the bluff, and so I was camping, I don't know, 30 feet above the lake. Sunset was off to the west. Nobody else around. Perfect weather, no bugs. And when I think of kind of idyllic aesthetics, that's the campsite I go back to. And there's been others pretty similar to that. And I think the common characteristics are, pretty isolated, next to the river. I love camping next to the river. And an evening without significant wind and no bugs. Those are probably the most common characteristics of a good camp.
There you go. Love it.
Yeah.
I noticed at the beginning on some of your photos that you were traveling with your dog. Are you still you still got your pup around?
No, she's thank goodness I've got supportive parents. She's staying with them. She's getting up there in age. She'll be 13 soon. And she just doesn't move like she used to.
Sure.
The heat was going to be pretty rough on her. She's an English setter, so she's a long-haired dog. Doesn't deal well with the heat. No old dog does, but so she's at home. And basically, I wanted to be able to hunt this fall, and I didn't want to wear her out so much walking along the road. She lives to chase birds, and while she was with me, she'd ride on the rickshaw most of the time, which, so she wasn't getting tired out too much. But once it got hot, it was obvious that although she enjoyed being out here, and I definitely enjoyed having her, it just wasn't in her best interest. And so yeah, a large portion of the trip she hasn't been with me, but I'm looking forward to getting home and spending some more time with the pup for sure.
Nice. Okay, so right now you're in North Dakota. What does the next however long you got until winter look like?
Yeah, so tomorrow I'm gonna keep heading west. I'm gonna head towards Williston, North Dakota. That's about 150 miles from here. That'll take me about a week, 10 days maybe, just kind of depending on what the terrain's like and where I veer off to in the meantime. So yeah, to Williston, and then I'm going to try to get to Fort Peck, the Fort Peck Dam before winter. And my dad's going to come pick me up about I think 2nd or 3rd of November. And so I've got about 20 days here to go about 300 miles and 15 miles a day. I can walk 15 miles in about 3 or 4 hours. And so, 4 to 5 hours. And so that's not really pushing it. That's still enjoying it and able to take time during the day to explore and do different things. And so I think it's a realistic goal to get to about Fort Peck, and then I'll go home for the winter, and hopefully winter doesn't hit too hard before then. This winter I'm going to I don't have anything lined out 100% yet, but I'm hoping to work down on the Rio Grande along the Texas-Mexico border, Big Bend National Park, guiding canoe trips down there. And so that's where I'm hoping to be over the winter. And once it starts to warm up again, I'll head back up this way and start back where I left off.
Nice, man. That sounds awesome. Sounds like a heck of a plan. And what I'm going to let you go here in just a second, but what are you looking forward to in the last 20 days here before you head back for the winter? Anything you want to get in or just soak in before you pause it?
Yeah, you said it. Soak it up. It's, leaving the trails is always a bit bittersweet. I'm definitely ready to get home and see family and reconnect for sure. But man, I love it out here too. I feel like I've got the world in my hands, so to speak. And so I think just staying in the moment, not trying to focus on things I have to do when I get back, cleaning up the house, preparing it for winter. We got the holidays coming up, things like that. Preparing for next year. I've got to take my cart and turn it into a canoe cart. And so, there's some work to do and planning do. So I'm trying to keep those things at the back of my mind and focus on the next 20 days and what benefits it offers me. So.
Awesome, man. Well, hey, John, I really appreciate you you taking the time and talking with us,
Yeah,
man.
man.
I really enjoyed the conversation, and best of luck. I hope the next 20 days, I hope you crush it, and even on top of that, I hope you find yourself some birds on the way back down to Kansas.
Me too. I'm looking forward to some pheasant fajitas.
There we go. All right, John. Hey, you mentioned your Facebook and Instagram earlier. If people want to connect with you, if they want to be a part of this journey, if they want to talk to you, or however they want to connect or find out more, follow up on your trips, on some of your journal entries and such, what's the best way to connect with you?
Yeah, you can find me online on Instagram. You can either search John Kraft, Kraft, like the cheese, or my Instagram handle, Instagram or Flatlanders Pursuit, no punctuation, or on Facebook, it's just under John John Kraft, Kraft. So hit me up over there, send me a message, and I'll be happy to connect with anybody who's interested in what I'm doing.
Oh, yeah. Another episode of the Buffalo Roamer podcast in the books. Thanks so much for tuning in. If you enjoyed the show, please subscribe wherever you are listening, whether that's Spotify, Apple Podcasts. I don't think many people listen on Google Podcasts, but maybe you're one of the few. Please subscribe. That really helps us and gets this podcast out to more new listeners. So that's a big favor you can do. Also, leave us a review if you're so inclined. That goes a long way, too. Don't forget to check out Buffalo Roamer Wilderness Trips. We're going to the Yukon River. Amazing backcountry, pristine wilderness. One of the most beautiful wilderness areas I've ever been in my life. Going to be an awesome trip. That's next July. Check out buffaloroamer.com for the details on that. And stick around. We got more shows coming out the first and third Friday of every month here on the Buffalo Roamer podcast. Get outside, get some fresh air, get after it.